What's up, barbecue family? Wagyu brisket is an expensive investment, but it's like the holy grail of brisket. If you're serious about elevating your brisket game, then one day you're going to want to try this awesome breed of beef. So if you're thinking of smoking a Wagyu brisket for Thanksgiving or Christmas or another special occasion, then I want to warn you about one super important thing you'll need to know so you don't screw it up. Because trust me, I screwed one up because I didn't know this. Wagyu beef is a breed of cow that comes from Japan originally, but now there's all sorts of varieties, including American Wagyu, but they all have one thing in common. They have a ton of intramuscular fat, and that makes them perfect for smoked brisket. But there's a problem. With all that extra intramuscular fat comes a lot more intramuscular connective tissue. If you look at a Wagyu brisket point, you can actually see the super thick spider web of extra connective tissue. If you've ever cooked a brisket before, you know the trick is to cook it long enough to break down this tissue, otherwise you're gonna have a tough brisket. If you undercook a brisket, all that connective tissue is gonna be super tight like an elastic band, and it's gonna be tough, but if you overcook it, it's going to fall apart. That connective tissue is gonna be non-existent, and you'll get a crumbly texture that nobody likes. The trick is to get it somewhere in the middle where you pull it apart and it has a little bit of resistance, but then it breaks apart easily. That's what we're looking for. The problem with a Wagyu brisket is that your normal techniques for telling when a brisket is done might not work on a Wagyu brisket. I'm gonna give you an example. I bought 2 Wagyu briskets last month and I cooked them both on my Oklahoma Joe's offset smoker. With the first brisket, I separated the point and the flat and cooked them separately. I followed my normal brisket method and wrapped it when I got to the right color. Then I finished it in the oven. When it got to 200 degrees in the flat, I started probing for tenderness, and this is where I went wrong. The flat was still pretty tough, and I knew it had about an hour or so left to go, but the point was nice and buttery. It was probing really tender, so I pulled it out and let it rest. Then I finished the flat for another hour until it probed tender. But when I actually went to slice into the point, it was still a bit undercooked and it didn't pull apart very easily. This is because the interconnective tissue in the point was super thick and it just needed another 30 minutes to an hour and it would have been perfect. Now the second Wagyu brisket I cooked the next day with the point and the flat muscle attached. When I probed for tenderness, the point was tender, but the flat was still too tough. The good thing here was that I couldn't just take the point out, so I had to continue cooking with the flat until they were both done. The result was that I didn't get tricked by the point being super tender, and I gave it enough time to fully render those interconnective tissues, and it got super tender. So what's the lesson here? With Wagyu brisket, the point takes longer to fully render than a normal brisket, but it still might probe tender in the point and trick you into thinking it's done when it actually needs a little bit more time. So the first solution is to cook with the point and the flat muscle attached, so by the time that flat probes tender, the point is done for sure. The second solution is to separate the point and the flat, but don't take the point off of the heat source until that flat probes tender. And the third solution is the hardest, but probably the best. You just have to go by experience and the feel of the meat sometimes. I don't have the experience of cooking hundreds of Wagyu briskets to know 100% when that point muscle is perfectly done. But from the ones that I've cooked, what I would say is this. Normally when you're probing for doneness, you want a resistance on your probe that's like room temperature butter. Or as Harry Sue says, you want resistance like you're probing into a jar of room temperature peanut butter. But for a Wagyu point, you're looking for almost no resistance. It's almost like probing into a bag of melted butter, like Aaron Franklin says. Which, as an aside, makes sense because Aaron Franklin actually uses high quality brisket, which is probably closer to Wagyu than your typical choice brisket, or even prime. So Wagyu has some little quirks that make it more difficult to get it right, but let me tell you guys, it's totally worth it. I'd say Wagyu brisket is about 30% better than a choice or a prime brisket. It's juicier, it's softer, it's more tender, but if you're used to cooking choice or prime, it's not gonna be like a religious experience or anything. It's not like 10,000 times better than those types of brisket. It's just noticeably better and you'll be like, okay, I get it now. And that's exactly why competition pitmasters use it, because it gives them a slight advantage over other teams that are using, let's say, a choice or a prime or a certified Angus beef brisket. But if you're used to cooking select grade briskets, then this is like 1,000 times better than a select brisket. It's on a different planet. I actually cook a lot of select briskets, and jumping up to this, it's like insanity. It is way better. But select briskets are very lean. They don't have a lot of fat in them, so that's not much of a surprise. All right, guys, catch you in the next video.